Okay, we are going to make a start now. Welcome, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning from wherever you are joining us today. I hope you can all hear us, at least hear me for now, and see us. My name is Shalom Lloyd. I am co-founder of eMQT and Chief Strategy Officer here, Emerging Market Quality Trials. On behalf of my entire team here, welcome to our first Africa is Ready movement webinar. In celebration of Black History Month here in the UK, where we're based, today we have invited our peers and colleagues from pharma, biotech, CRO world, diagnostic community to join us. So thank you all for carving out time out of your busy schedules to attend this webinar. It has taken the eMQT team about 2 years to develop the amazing tools that we'll demonstrate to you today. But this webinar came about because we realized that when it comes to Africa, we do have to work together collaboratively and share like we've never done before. Tomorrow, we'll be hosting African healthcare professionals on our second webinar with HCPs from across Africa attending. We know that your time is precious, so we'll get straight into it. But before we do, some housekeeping rules. I'd appreciate you to be kept on mute and your camera off. You can use the chat functionality and the Q&A functionality. We're all used to remote working and Zoom and Teams and whatnot. This webinar is also being recorded. So Africa is ready. Are we ready? We'll make a start. Thank you for listening.
Shalom, thank you. And thank you to everyone again for joining this afternoon. We're very excited to have this opportunity to talk to you. My name's Tina Barton. I'm Chief Operating Officer here at eMQT. So I think what's important for us is just let's first talk about why we've come together. As Shalom was just saying, it's now time for us to collaborate in a way we've maybe never collaborated before. Because we're here because we have a joint interest in how Africa can support our clinical research needs. We believe there's a massive untapped potential with sites, healthcare professionals, and many treatment-naive patients that have got diseases of interest to us as we develop drugs through the whole process. So what we want to do is to learn how we can all get involved together, how we might be able to help drive this forward to get those additional goals that we need to meet. And diversity is certainly one of those that's right up there at the moment. So what are our current challenges? I don't think any of you will be surprised by this list. Always, it's completing our studies on time. And we do that by finding the best sites, getting those sites initiated with all the complicated rules and regulations that we have to meet to do that these days. Meeting those recruitment goals, always the hardest part of a trial, and now we have to make sure we're addressing diversity in the most appropriate way too. And then we have to get that database locked. And I'm sure all of us remember our data management and analysis colleagues complaining to us that their time has been shortened yet again to meet the deadline. So we're always looking to ways to work more effectively and efficiently once we get to that point. And obviously we do all of this work and all of this effort, and we're hoping and planning for that positive result that the drug is going to go forward. A bit of history now. I actually predate ICH for my sins. I've been in this business a very long time, and it's been an absolute passion of mine, and I've enjoyed all of my time spent doing clinical research and developing new medicines for patients in need. When I look back to when ICH GCP was first released, we had the current challenges that won't be a surprise to any of us. We were still getting told we've got to do our studies on time. And we do that by making sure we find the best sites, getting them started, meeting the recruitment goals, and locking that database in the minimal time possible, and always wanting that positive result. So overall, as I said, nothing's really changed. If we look back or we look to the future, as where we're standing right now, it's no different. So what did we do then that helped us move forward and address some of those challenges? Because we did actually move forward and we did get better and faster at that time point. We built strategic partnerships. We looked at working together much more closely. We looked at expanding our reach and working better with sites to reduce their burden. I was particularly active in looking for new sites in new locations. And I always looked at streamlining startup, driving recruitment with greater site support. And then obviously we all know that we now use electronic data capture for all of our trials. So for me, that was a great move forward from all those days of coming back from monitoring visits with suitcases full of NCR copies of CRFs. So let's think about recruitment specifically, because this is a huge effort that we all undertake for our studies. And mostly it's the same challenge that we had before. It's driven by different things now. We have moved on quite a lot, I'm glad to say, but we've got much more complex protocols than we had in the 80s and 90s. We're looking for smaller benefits over the control arm because we've done those easy things. The burden on our patients is increasing. More and more we're using ePro tools and other similar things that allow the patient to be more independent, but also increases the burden. We're still using the same sites that we've used for many years. 85 to 90% of the sites in clinical trials are sites that have been used before. And in our current sites and our current locations, we've got an ever decreasing pool of naive patients. And what does that tell us? What are the current statistics? Quite shocking. 20% of activated sites never recruit a patient. 80% of trials miss their original recruitment timeline. And the cost of this delay to product launch is estimated to be between $600 and $8 million every day. Every day. So that's why we all work so hard to meet the challenges of our timelines. That's why our senior managers and corporate entities are always saying, when's that going to happen? Why are we delayed? It's so important that we work to time for our products. So a bit of a history lesson and our global drug development journey. As I said, I started way back on the left-hand side of this slide when we worked primarily in North America, Western Europe, Australia, and then ICH GCP arrived and we were doing the full-blown GCP traditional commercial clinical trials in those regions. But we didn't have enough patients and recruitment was more and more difficult. So in the 90s, we went into Central and Eastern Europe, just coming out of communist rule, not seen as commercial markets, but they had a massive population at the time with very capable healthcare professionals and treatment naive patients. And that made a massive difference very quickly into our recruitment expectations and timelines. And we were able to see real benefit of going to those countries. So that became the norm to expand into Central and Eastern Europe. As we searched more and more for patients and wanted to bring these medicines for broader areas around the world, we expanded into Latin America, India, China, and other parts of Asia. In the 2000s, patient access and their ability to get into trials became really important. And we're still looking to improve. So where do we go next? We have to find that next exit. We have to find that next place to go. And with the importance of diversity, it seems obvious to me that we should now be including Africa. I believe that Africa is the new frontier. By 2050, there's going to be up to 2.4 billion people in that continent. A third of the world's population will reside there, mainly treatment naive patients. They've got experience in clinical trials, either from non-commercial trials or also from the fact that many of the doctors that work in that area were originally trained in the Western world. So there's lots of scope and opportunity for us, I believe. And let's talk a bit more about that.
Thank you, Tina. As Tina had mentioned, it'll be great to I'll give you a few minutes to just look at this slide and the data on it. Africa is a continent that is made up of 54 countries, and it will add 80 additional people per minute into this world. It contributes alone 54% of the 54% of the world's population. It will refill an empty London 5 times a year. It's home to 1.2 billion people. This is a continent that can no longer be ignored, but has to be going to the mainstream for our global clinical trials. Although patients of African descent make up 17% of the world's population, less than 3% of people who look like myself are included in clinical trials. Taking it a step further, currently about 95% of cancer patients in sub-Saharan Africa are diagnosed way too late. This population offers us drug-naive patients across multiple disease areas. Africa is the rising billion, and you'll keep hearing this figure over and over and over again. It will add a huge population by 2050, a third of the world's population by 2050. What we do here at eMQT is that we are the bridge between yourselves in the industry and Africa. That's how we position ourselves, utilizing healthcare experts and technology to provide access to patients and high quality evidence patient data. We know, and we've heard from so many of yourselves in our industry, that there's barriers or perceived barriers. And our aim is to increase your confidence in working in Africa. Africa is volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. The kind of questions that we get from pharma, from biotech, from CROs sometimes, and from diagnostic organizations, is the infrastructure there? Do the healthcare professionals have the relevant experience and training? Is the culture a hindrance? Ethics and regs terrain? We do know that there are well-equipped hospitals and centers in Africa. We also know that they're well-trained and educated healthcare professionals, the diaspora, who've trained in the Western world, like Tina mentioned, and have now gone back to their home countries. Culture is a big one. There are 54 countries, like I mentioned, in Africa. And these countries have their own individual culture. But we should embrace this and not let it be a hindrance. In terms of ethics and regs, it's about building our understanding because there are processes in place ready to meet global requirements. Everywhere you look now, these words diversity and sustainability are absolutely everywhere. What we do know is that we're going to the same old sites, the same old suppliers. Diversity does drive sustainability, and Africa gives us diversity of patients, diversity of sites, diversity of suppliers, and diversity of tools. And it gets rid of that fear that we have, if only we can overcome it.
So let's talk a little bit more about diversity. I'm sure we're all very aware now that the FDA have mandated that clinical trials now need to have a plan. The diversity action plans are in place. We know what we have to do, and it's very clearly laid out for us. We have to demonstrate what the strategy is to make sure we have that diverse study population appropriate for our disease of interest. We have to have enrolment goals for underrepresented racial and ethnic groups and analysis plans of how we're going to evaluate the impact in this trial on those particular subgroups of our population. So we know what we need to do. Africa can help us with that. We should certainly consider having some of the sites for any of our trials that are appropriate for the disease areas in Africa. Historically, we've only considered Africa as a place to go for communicable diseases. So we're very familiar with the fact that a lot of the malaria work, the HIV work, even TB was done in that continent many years ago with many of the research foundations. But now, non-communicable diseases are much more prevalent, and incidence has become quite misleading. It's a changing time in this continent. The trend is going from communicable to non-communicable diseases, and we've seen that very much recently, and that's certainly going to be a real impact going forward with the release of the new vaccine for malaria. That's going to make a real big difference in terms of communicable diseases. So we're seeing this change. Let's look at what particular diseases of interest to us and how they are relevant to Africa. First of all, cancer. We still have a lot of work to do when it comes to oncology. There's a lot of cancer trials that go on all the time. There are still unmet medical needs. And these pictures show that there's a real high prevalence of cancer and cancer deaths as well in sub-Saharan Africa. Particularly, you'll see here from these pictures for breast, cervix, and others as well. Diabetes. I think we know already in the Western world that this is something that is of huge concern right now as the incidence increases all the time. Africa has many, many patients that are suffering from diabetes, and some of the numbers on this slide are truly shocking. For example, 45 million adults aged 20 to 79 in the Africa region have impaired glucose tolerance, which places them at high risk of type 2 diabetes, estimated to reach 110 million by 2045. So some really shocking numbers, and you can see on the right-hand side some top 5 countries where it's particularly prevalent, which include South Africa, Nigeria, Congo, Ethiopia, and Tanzania. So I truly believe that if we all work together with our African sites, we can bring success for all, and everyone will benefit. Patients will get access to new medicines. They'll get treatment options they never had the opportunity to have before, and they'll be able to get involved and contribute and learn themselves about clinical trials and the impact that can have for them and their families. As we said before, the healthcare professionals at the sites, the doctors particularly, are often very well trained, but it'll also give them the opportunity to upskill and create new roles in the clinical research arena for other members of their teams. They'll get increased expertise to the standards that we all work to. And again, they'll be able to offer their patients other treatment options. We all know that clinical research brings huge income and opportunity to countries. So this will allow for the hospitals, the region, to actually benefit overall as well, with increased employment and education opportunities, along with global alignment and recognition for the work that we all do. And of course, you as sponsors or people managing the trials get what you need as well. You will get that diversity of data and compliant data. Patient numbers are there, and the patients generally have not had many other therapies, so they will be easier to include into your programs and protocols. And hopefully all of that will mean faster recruitment, shorter timelines, something we all look to achieve. Just one other thing, we never forget, and we never should. The patients are at the core of everything we do.
Thank you, Tina. Now, we've talked about Africa. We've talked about the need to be in Africa and the why. So how do we get there? What is the solution for success? We know from what we've heard from talking to various pharmaceutical industry professionals that if you find capable sites and if they have the knowledge, then we can start to build centers of excellence in Africa. So what we're going to do now is actually demonstrate those solutions to yourselves. Firstly, we're going to start with the assessment tool for overseas markets, ATOM, and how we build those capabilities. The assessment tool for overseas markets, ATOM, is eMQT's innovative tool, which provides an evaluation of site capacity and capabilities with the aim of supporting the development of centers of excellence in Africa for engagement in global clinical trials. The establishment of such health care or medical centers of excellence across Africa is a necessity. It's about us collectively doing the right thing. And in one tool, we're able to collate all that information that you as pharma, DIA, CROs, professionals consider relevant and necessary to consider a site suitable and ready for a clinical trial or project when the protocol permits. This makes ATOM a tool that provides reliable, timely, accurate information to gauge the capability and capacity of a site or center within the continent. The aim of ATOM is therefore to gather knowledge, specific local requirements and capabilities to allow these African centers to demonstrate to you their expertise and readiness to participate in your projects. In a nutshell, really, in order to give drug development companies from pharma to biotech to startups to diagnostics to CROs the confidence that centers of excellence in Africa that are chosen for a specific project or trial not only have the required knowledge and capability, but have the infrastructure to meet the global requirements. So ATOM, what it does is there's up to 400 data points collected within ATOM for each site. Now we're going to go into the heart of this webinar and demonstrate that to yourselves. Hopefully you can still see us and hear us okay. Welcome to ATOM. This is the dashboard. And from here, you can see that it reports the sites and the countries involved with an interactive map for those of you who are like me, where geography is really lacking. The status of those sites are in the system, and there's an audit trail on the right-hand side listing any changes, when they were made, and by whom. You can also see on the screen here, there's an opportunity to add new sites, to search, and also there's an administrative function as well. Now we're going to walk you through the level of information that is collected within ATOM and how it's used to assess a site's readiness for clinical trials and also identify any gaps that site may have. Before we go into that, I really want to start by thanking one of our principal investigators from a site that we've proudly worked with, who is now listed on ATOM, Dr. Francine Ntumi, Director General of FCRM in Congo. We thank her for granting us the permission to use her site for the purposes of this demonstration. We actually wanted to do a recording and play, but we decided to do a live demonstration for our sins. We'll now take a look at how ATOM captured and recorded all the relevant information that was collected from Dr. Ntumi's site. So this is our site clearly identified at the top of this page. And on the right-hand side, you'd have seen a tool that gives you the status of where it is. You can see here that it's archived because every information that we can collect today has been collected. There is a full audit trail of all the information that's been entered for this site, allowing us to go back and update as new information comes to light without losing any historic information or data that we reported earlier. Across the top, there are 9 tabs which identify the different categories that we have assessed when compiling the information for this site into Atom. There is a home page, and this is it here, you can see, and it provides you with the primary contact details for the lead investigator at this site. It is worth noting at this point as well that, of course, you may have more than one investigator at a particular hospital or site, and because they're therapeutically aligned or therapeutic specific, some hospitals don't have those departments as we do here in the Western world. So although there might be a physician specializing in a particular area, for example, rheumatoid arthritis, the hospital may not have a rheumatology department as such. That doesn't mean to say that the expertise does not exist in that particular site. Now let's look at the other 8 tabs. The team tab, this is the first one, and this details the team at the site, meaning those relevant for running a clinical trial. It doesn't include all the doctors, nurses, and staff at that site, but purely those that the lead investigator feels would be involved in the delivery of a particular trial and the roles that those individuals would typically take. The next one is experience. This next tab looks at the experience and what sort of clinical trials they have been involved in previously, who sponsored them, pharma or academic groups perhaps, and also experience of trials across the phases. As well as trial experience, we look at training for clinical trials, particularly GCP training, and data reporting experience using EDC systems. We collect information about their auditing experience and the way in which they contract with external companies to run a trial at their site. The next couple of tabs we have here are infrastructure and facilities. And they go into detail about the infrastructure and the facilities within the site. For infrastructure, in today's digital world, it's important to understand the ease of access to the internet and whether they have a dedicated equipment available for clinical trial work. And particularly important, the backup, data storage, and data security facilities in place. In the facilities tab, it looks at the internal resources at the site. How many patient beds do they have available for clinical trial subjects? And all other needs that must be in place, such as ECGs, fridges, freezers, potentially as low as minus 80 degrees, that may be required for storage of clinical trial materials. As we know, long-term archiving is a key requirement of GCP, and it's important to understand from the sites the process they use, whether electronic or paper, and how they accommodate the monitor when they come to review the source documents. All this information is captured within Atom. The next tab is sampling. And on the screen, you can see it's about all the potential biological samples that may be required across any trial or project. This includes routine blood samples and how these can be taken, analyzed at the local hospital or laboratory and reported. It also collects what the specialist requirements they're able to do are, such as genetic testing or specific viral agents such as COVID antibodies, something we did quite a lot of over the last 3 years. This tab really helped us during sample collection projects because it records all histology expertise and experience and the ability to provide frozen sections. The logistics of collecting, storing, and shipping samples are also covered in this particular part of Atom. Pharmacy and safety. This tab is all about pharmacy and safety requirements, focusing on the clinical trial medications and safety reporting for patients on the trials. Information is collected about the pharmacy, storage, and dispensing, including formulation preparations for any IMP, as well as returns and destruction policies. Safety is paramount in all that we do in our industry, so Atom records what emergency procedures there are in place at that site that may be required during a trial. Ethics and regs. This tab is all about the ethics and regulatory process necessary at this particular investigator site. It captures everything you would expect that we need to know around meeting schedules, required submission documents, review timelines, and what else might be required to achieve that first site approval. This section can also include some specific questions around the informed consent form, especially related to what the local ethics committee expect to see, and if there's a standard template in place that has to be utilized and adapted when doing a trial. The last tab is the files. This, I have to say, is my favorite tab. We talked about the fears pharmaceutical companies have in terms of, is the infrastructure in place? Do people have the experience? And in this tab, we're able to attach files, most obviously CVs of team members, but also we utilize videos a lot. And this is where they're housed in this section of Atom. Videos of the site facilities is an excellent way of understanding what is available at that particular site we want to work with. We're able to provide you these videos for each of the departments, which will give you added confidence. Once all of this information has been collated for each site, an Atom report can be generated and tailored as required. And these reports can also help the healthcare professionals see where the gaps are for each of their sites. And this allows you in the pharmaceutical companies to receive site, country, and disease-specific information. Atom allows for validated sites for clinical trials, aiding the site selection process that you may have. One of the great things about this Atom tool is the gaps it identifies. Once we enter all this information, Atom is able to identify where the gaps are. And more often than not, since working in Africa, our teams have identified that the biggest gaps that we find are knowledge gaps. So we've talked about the assessment tool for overseas markets. We've talked about Atom. And Atom has helped us identify the knowledge gaps for a particular site. This led us to develop a second tool called Insight. Insight is the tool that we use to plug those identified knowledge gaps. And we'll now walk you through Insight. Welcome to Insight. This is the next step of the solution to enable healthcare professionals across the African continent to become fully trained in the standards required for clinical trials run according to ICA, GCP, and global regulatory requirements. And of course, continue on their journey towards building centers of excellence in Africa. It's a very innovative platform that provides targeted knowledge and learning plans to ensure that all involved in clinical trials are able to understand and execute their roles to ultimately bring added value to patients and ensure the necessary level of understanding and focus to meet global requirements. Insight has been designed with multiple stakeholders in mind, including yourselves in the pharmaceutical industry, so that we can all learn about running trials in Africa and dispel some of these fears that we know exist. But today, our focus is to show you how we can work together to enable healthcare professionals based in Africa to become more knowledgeable, plug those gaps, and give you the confidence in their competencies and expertise in this particular area. Healthcare professionals in Africa are the bridge between the patients and the pharmaceutical industry. And through this insight platform, healthcare professionals will obtain targeted knowledge and become armed with the tools to help ensure they're able to execute their roles to meet regulatory requirements, allowing increased value to be provided to patients at the same level and understanding and focus as their global counterparts. From introduction to clinical trials, to more insight into their clinical research role, to the patient, the trial protocols, regulatory standards, through to collecting the data and much more.
Welcome to the Emerging Markets Quality Trials Knowledge Management System and the Healthcare Professionals section. Here in this section, we aim to enable you to learn more about global clinical trials and how to run those to ICH GCP standards. There will be a general introduction to clinical trials. There will be, most importantly, aspects of patient safety and drug management, looking at what you need to do, your role, your responsibilities to enable successful completion of global clinical trials to the standards required today. Well, our aim here at eMQT is to support you in your learning and your opportunity to get involved in global clinical trials and to enhance and target your knowledge and understanding of what's required these days. In this way, you will bring value to yourself, to your institution, and most importantly, to the patients that you serve.
Insight has been designed with ease of use in mind, making it suitable for everyone involved. They will have access to a variety of chapters and modules tailored to meet their needs and budget. It takes them on a journey through the clinical trials pathway, taking cultural differences into account, whilst encouraging an inclusive behavior. At the end of each module, each learner will have acquired more knowledge, key learnings, and important information to enable greater understanding and input into their own role in research and potential advancement in their chosen area. There are 11 chapters available to healthcare professionals on this platform, from drug development overview, regulations for medicinal products, ethical issues, drug safety, clinical development, clinical trial key documents, to clinical trial process, investigational drug management, data management, analysis and reporting, and of course, quality in clinical trials. These chapters can either be delivered as face-to-face training, virtually through a training session, or managed individually online, as we've done for some centers in Africa. Once the healthcare professionals set up their account, they will be able to access their own dashboard. For the purpose of this demonstration, we've selected a few chapters to give you a flavor very quickly of what they contain and how easily they can navigate the Insight platform. So we're going to choose a chapter on regulations for medicinal products. As you can see here, actually, there are knowledge checkpoints.
Welcome to this.
Apologies. There are knowledge checkpoints where they can check their knowledge learned for a particular chapter or module. You can see here that this particular investigator is 92% complete for their module. And you can see within this particular chapter, there are four modules to complete. What we're going to do is run you through just a couple of the slides for you to have an understanding of how they learn through this platform.
Welcome to this training session, which will describe to you the responsibilities of an investigator according to ICH Good Clinical Practice, otherwise known as ICH GCP regulations. Transforming healthcare research in Africa. eMQT are focused on sub-Saharan Africa and helping to bridge the gap between the pharmaceutical companies and the centers of excellence in Africa, as eMQT believe it is important that clinical trials reflect the true global nature of the world's population. Today, the focus of this presentation is on ICH GCP and what the requirements are for investigator sites such as yours. It really focuses on the investigator responsibilities at the site, and this presentation will not only give you an overview, but really talk about the responsibilities under ICH that you will all have as a site when conducting a global clinical trial.
We will now look at another chapter here on clinical trials, key documents, and focus on just, again, a couple of slides. And as you can see here, there are knowledge checkpoints at each chapter.
So what is the purpose of the protocol? The protocol has a very clear purpose. It describes the why, the what, and the how to try to answer a specific research question. It has to have clear and concise objectives, and it has to document the expectations for success or failure, both clinically and statistically. The contents of the protocol. GCP is very clear about what the protocol should contain. Contents are clearly listed in its requirements, and it has to describe the background and methodology to the research questions that you're trying to answer. It has to talk about the objectives, the design, the methodology that you're using, and the statistical considerations that have been thought about in putting the protocol together. Last but not least, it talks about the need to explain the organization of the trial. And as you can see, this document has to really cover a huge amount of information. It is critical to ensure that you can run your trial consistently and in the same way at every single site. It's clearly a control document for any trial, and therefore it has to be version controlled. Additionally, any changes or updates that are required are also controlled. And I'm going to talk about control documents, version control, and also changes and updates later in this module.
We hope that gave you some insight into insight, forgive the pun. In addition to the healthcare professional chapters, you will see that there's a specific area dedicated to pharma professionals as yourselves. This provides some insight and knowledge into things like the do's and don'ts of working in Africa to dispel some of the fears that we know, as I mentioned previously, still exist today about this vibrant and exciting continent with so much potential. Should you or any members of your team wish to obtain more information about the pharma chapters, please do contact us for a one-to-one demonstration. This brings us to the end of our live demonstration, and we really thank you for listening, knowing how busy you all are. eMQT has been listed as a continuing professional development CPD provider. Hence, these courses have all been CPD accredited. In order to increase the flow of patients into trial from Africa, we have to work together and not in silos. In our industry, we tend to work in silos. And our ask today is for you to join the movement across our pharmaceutical industry to upskill sites and actively contribute and embrace African patients into our trials. What we have done, actually, what we continue to do, is develop sponsorship levels where we can upscale these sites. And this could be sites that are tailored to a specific therapeutic area. So we've named these levels according to African rivers. So the Congo River level is where a sponsorship package covers the training of 3 sites, 5 members within that site across 3 modules. The Niger River covers 2 sites, 3 staff members, and 2 modules. And the Zambezi River covers 1 site, 2 members, and 1 module. This really brings us to the end of the webinar in terms of what we're presenting to you. And it's really now open for Q&A. You will receive a small short form for feedback on the webinar, so we'll understand what you want to hear from us next. It is our first one for the pharma industry, and it gives you the overview of how we really can do things and work together to include African and global clinical trials. The Q&A and chat functionality have been open, so please feel free to drop any questions that you have for us, any information that you require. And we hope you've enjoyed the webinar and that you will join the movement. So questions, please. I think the Q&A and the chat functionality are open. Do we have any questions at all? We're not usually a shy bunch or quiet bunch in our industry. There is a question that has come in. I will suggest that the eMQT team either unmute and bring up their cameras. Do you have any enrollment recruitment data from the sites that you work with? We absolutely do. And we're able to provide that to anyone who reaches out to us to ask for that information. Obviously, today, what we wanted to do was to demonstrate tools that we're able to use. The fact that if other people have tools that will also enable this to happen, our aim is really to make sure that African patients are included. And of course, we're a data-driven industry. So we do collect all the data and information, enrollment, recruitment from the sites that we work with. Yes.
Shalom, would you allow me to tell a little recruitment story from one of our case studies?
Absolutely, Tina.
So this was a wonderful surprise. As I said at the beginning of this webinar, recruitment is always so problematic. Excuse me. And we were doing a study with one of our sites that was an infectious disease, and there'd been an outbreak in their community near to the hospital. And so we got our study going, but of course, like all studies, it didn't start quite as soon as we wanted to. And we'd only recruited about 50% of the patients when the outbreak came to an end. And so there were no patients in their immediate area anymore. So we were obviously very concerned about that maybe we weren't going to meet our goals for our sponsor. And so we had a meeting with the site, and we were all quite concerned at the eMQT end about what we were going to do next. We needn't have worried. They were completely prepared of how to solve this problem. They went out and bought an SUV. They'd agreed that the team members that were working on the study could have a week away from their day jobs, as it were, and off they went to where the outbreak had moved to. And by the end of that week, they came back with all the information that we needed. So it just goes to show that they're absolutely committed to working with us to solve the problems of clinical research and come up with some very innovative solutions that we hadn't actually even thought of at that point.
Thank you very much for that, Tina. We don't seem to have any questions. Are there any comments that you may have? We have somebody who has raised their hand, Julia, and she would like to ask it live. So let me try. There we go. We have allowed you to talk, Julia, if you want to. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. Is it working?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. This is an amazing presentation, and I think it's just incredible to see access to these tools that will give all the information that we need as we're going into a trial. My question is about access and maybe even like prediction in the future. So if it's out of scope, please let me know. But I know certain regulatory bodies across different countries require a certain number of patients to be in a trial from their country in order to approve the medicine and provide reimbursement. And I wonder if you can speak to some of the countries in Africa, how this works, and the source of my question is coming from, if we are trying to address inequity and advance health equity, I'm aware that like in South Africa, there are some medicines that are approved, maybe FDA, EMEA, and those with private insurance are able to access those medicines, but those with government insurance are not because of reimbursement. One way to close this gap is including more patients from these countries so that there's data on safety efficacy in those populations. And the government can understand the value, even from an economic standpoint, of approving and reimbursing those medicines. So just on the emphasis of being more inclusive of these different countries, is there maybe more detail you can color in on the importance of bringing in patients from different countries very intentionally so that we can ensure greater access once the medicine is completed in the trials?
That was a long one. Tina, do you want to take that one in terms of reimbursement and access?
Yes. So I think it's a moving target, basically. There are some governments in Africa that are starting to look at this, and what we're kind of seeing is there is some appetite for what we might call bridging studies, where they want to have it used in their own populations before they're willing to allow it to be marketed. But it's very new ground, and a lot of the countries behave very differently. And I have to say, in all honesty, it's not an area of specific expertise that I have. It's just that as we go into different countries and start working with specific molecules, sometimes it comes up, and sometimes we ask the question and they say, no, it's not an issue. So it's very much up till now been a case of individual situations that we've been able to evaluate in the specific countries we've been targeting. But I know it's an increasing area of interest that they've got from some of the major African markets.
Yeah, I suppose the question is, do we see that that's where the future is going? And so the importance of getting ahead of that is starting now.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you there. It's something that a couple of years ago, when eMQT first started out, before we realized that we had to take a step back and work with, from this aspect, from the ground up. When we first started looking at running trials in sub-Saharan Africa, we talked a lot with some of the sponsors about bridging studies, and it certainly is a way of getting ahead of the game for sure.
Yeah, and it's also a possible place of influence with these government decision making to show that inclusive with their patients directly, even from an economic standpoint, reimbursement is actually a net positive budget, from strictly numbers, having that data.
Yeah.
No,
Hugo, thank
absolutely.
you very much. We've got a couple of other questions on the chat.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
There is another one. Marcus is asking, thank you very much for your comment, Marcus. Maybe I missed it, but besides ethics and regulatory requirements, also biosafety regulations are also essential when it comes to shipping samples. Is Atom also capable of catching up on, for example, outgoing diagnostic measures?
There are some questions in there about shipping of samples and the information that might be needed. But again, this is another thing that as we're working and moving forward, we're seeing this being added to. So I can see that, Atom is a tool that is a living tool. So we will be adding new questions as these things come up. Specifically, we've already got in the regulatory section the requirement for an MTA, which is a material transfer agreement that many African countries need before anything can be shipped out, be it data or samples. But we're seeing that as a moving target, really. So absolutely, it's something we have to keep our eye on and make sure we do collect the required information.
Thank you, Tina. We've got another one that says representation. Thank you for that. Would be great to understand if you're looking for partners for the delivery of the studies at different sites and countries. I think that's a great question. I think one of the ways we started was that we cannot work in silos. It'll take an army, all of us working together. We have worked since we started with different partners, collaborated with different organizations because we all bring something to the table. Africa is still a relatively new terrain in terms of global commercial trials, not investigator-led. So yes, we're certainly open to having discussions and working with partners to achieve the goal of that inclusivity. Anything else to add there, Tina?
No, I think that's fine. I'll take the next question if you like, which is around what happens once they've completed Insight and the courses, and what support do we get? And that's the next phase of what eMQT is really involved with. We work with those sites. We don't desert them. We get them trained. We get them to the point where we think they can behave as centres of excellence, and then we work with them. People always ask us, Shalom and I, and other members of our team, so what is eMQT? Are you a pharma company? No, we don't develop our own drugs. Are you a CRO? Well, maybe sometimes. Are you an SMO? Well, once in a while, perhaps. Are you consultants? Are you free? So the answer is yes and no to all of those. Basically, what we want to do, as Shalom said early on in the presentation, is bridge the gap. So first of all, it's about upskilling the people that we need to help us do this work in sub-Saharan Africa. And that's what Atom and Insight are helping us with. We want to know that there are capable and qualified sites out there. The next thing is just to hold their hands as they work through it. So we do work very much with our sponsors as that interface, often a sort of in the CRO type role, working with the sites to make sure that they can deliver on what you as sponsors need for them in the particular study that they may have been enrolled in. So absolutely, we don't leave them to their own devices until we feel that they're experienced enough to, they don't need us anymore. And we can move on and work with new sites and other people that want to come and join in this global drug development platform that we all work in.
Thank you, Tina. There's another question, a question from Bridget asking, saying, thank you for the presentation. You're most welcome. How many sites are included in the first platform, and what GDPR regulations apply? Our CTO is on here. I'm trying to find Emily. She's right on here. Emily, I'm going to bring you up and allow to talk to you know if you want to start from there.
Sure. I mean, the number of sites on the platform is increasing all the time. We're a small organization and we have gone with the view that we don't go gung-ho and try and talk to, 200-300 sites or whatever. We're taking it step by step. So we're in the tens rather than the hundreds. But we're going to each of these sites and working with them very thoroughly in a very detailed way to make sure that we can have all the information that we need. And I'll let Emily talk about the GDPR aspects that we took into account as we built Atom.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, so part of the so welcome everyone. My name's Emily Moore. I'm the CTO at eMQT, and some of the aspects we built into GDPR. We do have some questions regarding GDPR within the actual tool on confidentiality at the sites and with the patients. But not only that, what we do is when we discuss or talk to a site, we request that they give us permission to store their data within the Atom tool. So that's one of the key pieces that we ensure that the sites and the staff at those sites are happy that we are collating information on the site, on the investigators and staff at the site. So we have got documentation SOP surrounding that piece. If that's answered the question that was asked. I can't see the actual question, but
yes, thanks, Emily.
Are there any other questions, thoughts, comments? I think we've covered all the questions that we have received in the chat. Just looking at the Q&A board, there are no questions there either. I think we can say thank you to everyone really for taking the time out to attend our webinar. Please feel free to reach out to us. The contact details are there for our colleague Hannah. And also, you will receive a short questionnaire survey about this webinar. And we really thank you for joining us and hope that, we've given you some food for thought and that you've taken home some of the key messages we wanted you to take home, which means that Africa is ready and that we need to work together as a global pharmaceutical community to be able to put Africa on the map and get these sites and patients to be part of the global clinical trial world. Thank you again for listening. Bye for now.
Bye-bye, everyone.